The Smithsonian Faculty Fellowship Program represents a rewarding academic professional development opportunity for faculty at Montgomery College. The fellowships are a product of a unique collaboration between Montgomery College and the Smithsonian Center for Learning and Digital Access. It's the first of its kind between the Smithsonian Institution and a community college.
Ethan Goffman is a member of the English faculty and the associate editor of Sustainability, Science, Practice, and Policy, and has written the journal's weekly blog for the last 6 years. He also writes for the online magazine Earth Talk and has published in Grist, Contemporary Literature, the Tacoma Voice, the Montgomery Gazette, and others. Ethan is the author of Imagining Each Other, Blacks and Jews in Contemporary American Literature, and co-editor of the New York Public Intellectuals and Beyond, and Politics and the Intellectual, Conversations with Irving Howe. From 2009 to 2014, he was the transit chair of the Montgomery County, Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club.
Thank you. So my original title, when I first proposed it, Environmental Justice from the Community to the World. So it's sticking. We can see Katrina, 2005, I think that was. A big example, but many examples keep coming up. So let me just talk about the course first, and then we'll get to environmental justice. English 102, almost everyone has to take it. They don't necessarily want to take it. It is the second composition course with a focus on research and argumentation. I usually give 5 or 6 topic areas. I do not want them to come in and have one topic area and then they hate that topic area, but they had to take the course. So I try and give something for every student, usually based on social issues like higher education, why are we in college, fracking, various other topics. So I want them to have a choice. So environmental justice is just going to be one topic throughout the course, and they can choose whether to write about it or not. I wanted to reach more of them with the museum visit, so as the fellowship progressed, I added immigration and American identity as another topic. It fit the museums we were going to, and I've taught it many times because it obviously fits our student population here, right? So, environmental justice, what is it? A lot of the students do not know. Maybe not even everyone in here knows, although you're such an august group that you probably all do. But basically, the concept springs from the 1980s. There's been environmental injustice, which is sometimes known as an environmental racism. There's been that for decades, probably for centuries. So basically, nice neighborhoods like, I use Bethesda as an example because it's nearby. You know, they don't tend to have, garbage dumps or incinerators or highways going through the middle of town. Those tend to end up in poor and disenfranchised neighborhoods, minority, marginalized groups. That's true around the world. It's clearly true in the US. So prior to the 1980s, there wasn't really a concept of environmental justice or injustice, even though it was happening. In the 1980s, the most famous, well, there's really 2, but the most famous early in environmental justice was Robert Bullard. Now there's the organizer Van Jones, who you might have heard of, but Robert Bullard kind of pioneered the field and realized this is a pattern that's going on everywhere. It's systemic. He showed that it's systemic. And this was all coming out of the civil rights movement, right? Because it had, at least on the face of it, won its big victories with legislation. But so this was one of the next steps. So it had an activist side to it and also a scholarly side, proving that environmental justice is an issue, and that it actually proved that it's race-based in the US, at least through the 20th century, more than class-based, which surprised me when I found that out. I don't know whether that is still true or not, but I guess it probably shouldn't have surprised me. Okay, so here are just some class readings. Before the museum visit, I wanted to get them, conversant with various aspects. So here's one about a main artery in a poor Latino community in Colorado. Standing Rock Sioux tribe fighting the pipeline near their reservation. Baltimore, if you've heard of Destiny Watford, she actually organized, a high school student who organized her community in Baltimore, which has very high rates of asthma because there's lots of garbage dumps and incinerators, right? Asthma, bad health conditions. This is kind of typical of many such neighborhoods. So they were going to build a giant incinerator there, and she organized and stopped it. And then some international perspective on it also. It became codified kind of in the US, but now it's a worldwide kind of movement. Okay, so we did the reading and discussion. I put together a Smithsonian learning lab based on environmental justice, so I had the students look at that. So that was the preparation. We got to the museum. There were basically there's a very interesting film that kind of shows the Native American connection to nature, which is ongoing. This is all background that's going to lead to environmental justice, right? So the tour of our universe, that shows different Native American communities and myths and what they think of the nature, lots of animal stories, corn is holy. So there's a real connection between nature and the land, and you can compare that to the colonial, and this is pretty standard, a lot of literature does this, the colonial view of domination, use the land, exploit it, use it up, versus being part of the land and not separate from it, right? So that's the first part. Second part was nation to nation, which is about treaties between the United States and Native Americans. Basically 3 sections. So the first part, the US was pretty much not that much stronger than the native nations, so they needed to work together. So they had a certain amount of respect for each other and a certain amount of equality in negotiations. So both sides at least seemed to take the treaties seriously. Second part was by the 19th century, the US government was strong enough that they could pretty much do what they wanted. Treaties were just a form of getting basically Indian removal, making them move west so that the US could get minerals or land or whatever they wanted, right? And then more recently, the 20th century, the native peoples have always respected the treaties and considered them important and showing that they are actually individual nations with their own identity. And they use them as a tool to gain rights in court cases, which they had at least some victories, especially over fishing rights and over, more recently, environmental, because that's one of the tools, because there's a lot of different frontline environmental justice and environmental issues that Native Americans are taking part of, like if you think of Keystone XL, which carries the dirty tar sand oil that causes climate change. There's a lot of, especially Canadian Native American groups involved in that. Lots of things about mineral extraction, uranium extraction on treaties, et cetera. And the very end of Nation to Nation, when I took them last year, They didn't have this up yet. But this year, the students said, hey, that's the Standing Rock Sioux. That was the last exhibit that they just added. So we didn't have it at the beginning, but we do now. So the museum is catching up with us, I guess. Anyway, this is just one example of an icon in the museum that we looked at. So if you look at it just real quickly, it's kind of the sun. It's very, you can see how nature influences the world, right? You have the sun in the middle, which is very powerful. You have animals in a circle around. It's circular, so it's kind of the continuation of life. And if you go, the whole museum is actually really curvy, and there's a giant main dome in the middle with the sun streaming through the middle. So it's all intended to show the view of nature as continuous, and the horizon and the sky. So that's the whole architecture of the museum. Here's near the beginning of the native treaties. You've got, we can look at it ironically, we probably instantly do. Maybe when the artist forged it, it was a sign of equality between natives and the US. There are also wampum belts with two parallel tracks, that basically symbolizing two peoples will live side by side peacefully and respect each other. Okay, so students, the last part was students reported back to the class, so everyone gave a short individual presentation, because not everyone came on this trip, so everyone, the next class gave a short presentation on an exhibit that impressed them in some way, and then we also had further discussion. So, like one student talked about the varieties of corns and the cycle of life, and in that part of the museum, there's the view that no death is permanent, it's just part of a continuation, which really impresses some students. The buffalo, you might have heard this already, that they used every part of the buffalo, but the colonists just came west and killed them off en masse. So nature is there to be conquered, right? It's there for human use or even just amusement. It was actually also part of war against the natives. There's one bowl that's, well, actually the whole room is shaped like a bowl, but there are also bowls, and that's the earth and sky. So it's the same theme, right, that would be in some of the art, would be the earth and sky. That is our universe. That's why it's called our universe, and we are part of it. Okay, so that was in a nutshell. Oh, then the last thing is they could choose to write any of their papers or their research papers on environmental justice. Okay, so the other topic I had them do coupled with a museum visit was immigration and American identity. This was not in a museum we visited. I believe it's in the National Portrait Gallery. I could not resist putting it up, because who could, right? So, and it's, what is an American, right? Well, in many ways, and ironically, but maybe also seriously, this picture is asking that. So what holds us together? Why are we one country? You know, Japan, it's important to be Japanese. But what makes us a single country? So, versions of American identity, the melting pot, we all melt together into the pre-existing order. I use Pat Buchanan here. He has both an essay and a notorious Diane Rehm interview, so that's a good way to get it started, because he thinks the US is the English language, Judeo-Christian heritage, certain holidays, right? You must melt into the melting pot. And then I give other definitions, such as a salad, stew, gorgeous mosaic, which is from Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Coalition. And someone's always going to say democracy, free speech. Sometimes they'll say it sooner. Sometimes I might have to push them. But that leads to the U.S. Constitution, which, okay, to my mind, that's what makes us Americans. Fidelity to the Constitution, even though I do think it's a little too hard to change. So free speech, right to assemble, right to vote, even the Second Amendment I have to talk about sometimes. All right, so here are some class readings going from Pat Buchanan, Paul Krugman, a completely different version. Some narratives by second-generation immigrants about how they fit in the U.S., and then some stuff about Trump and our current situation. And so at the museum, we go to American democracy, like many social justice people, and many voices, one nation. And I kind of ask, is this realistic or is it a little sanitized, showing a little bit too much of an optimistic face of America? We get the e pluribus unum, and thank you very much.